October 23, 1944. The Hurtgen Forest, Germany. Obergefreiter Hans Weber crouched behind a shattered oak tree, his Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle pressed against his shoulder. Through the morning mist, he could hear them coming. American infantry moving through the dense undergrowth with a confidence that seemed reckless given the terrain favoured defenders. Weber had survived 3 years on the Eastern Front. He understood the rhythm of infantry combat, the careful dance of fire and manoeuvre, where soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles exposed themselves only long enough to fire before seeking cover to work their bolts and chamber the next round. He had killed Soviet soldiers in this manner, had watched German machine gunners cut down wave after wave of Red Army infantry. The Americans would learn the same lesson. The first American soldier emerged from the tree line 60 meters away. Weber aimed carefully, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The Mauser barked and the American fell. Weber worked his bolt, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round from the internal 5-round magazine. The practiced motion took perhaps 2 seconds, an eternity in combat, but acceptable when your enemy faced the same limitations. Except the Americans didn't face the same limitations. As Weber raised his rifle to engage a second target, the forest erupted with a sound he'd never heard before. Not the measured crack of bolt-action rifles fired in sequence, but a continuous rolling thunder of semi-automatic fire. 8 rounds, 10 rounds, 12 rounds without pause. American soldiers advancing through cover were firing as they moved, suppressing German positions with volumes of accurate fire that defied everything Weber understood about infantry tactics. A bullet struck the tree inches from his head, spraying splinters across his face. Another round impacted the ground at his feet. Weber pressed himself flat, realizing with growing horror that he was facing not a machine gun emplacement, but individual riflemen firing faster than he could work his bolt. In the 90 seconds it took his squad to fire and reload their Mauser rifles, the Americans had delivered 3 times the volume of fire. Weber survived that engagement, but 17 men in his company did not. In his after-action report, he wrote a single sentence that would be repeated in various forms across every German defensive position from Normandy to the Rhine. The Americans possess a semi-automatic rifle issued to every infantryman. We are fighting the last war with the last war's weapons. The weapon that shattered German assumptions about infantry firepower was the M1 Garand, adopted by the United States Army in 1936 and issued to every rifleman in American infantry units by 1943. While German, British and Soviet soldiers carried bolt-action rifles requiring manual operation between each shot, American infantrymen wielded a semi-automatic weapon that fired as fast as they could pull the trigger. The technological gap was not dramatic. The engineering was not particularly sophisticated. Yet the cumulative effect of giving every American rifleman twice the rate of fire of his opponent proved more decisive than any wonder weapon Germany developed during the entire war. The M1 Garand represented American industrial philosophy applied to infantry weapons. Designer John Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at Springfield Armory, spent 16 years perfecting a semi-automatic rifle rugged enough for combat, accurate enough for military standards, and simple enough for mass production. The result weighed 9.5 pounds, measured 43 inches long, and fired the standard 30 caliber 06 Springfield cartridge from an 8-round en-bloc clip. The gas-operated action used expanding gases from fired cartridges to automatically eject spent cases and chamber fresh rounds. A soldier simply aimed again, and fired again without removing the weapon from his shoulder or working a bolt mechanism. General George S. Patton famously called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. His assessment, while characteristically bombastic, reflected a profound truth about infantry combat that German military theorists had somehow missed. In firefights between infantry units, victory belonged not to the side with the most accurate rifles or the best trained marksmen, but to the side that could deliver the most fire in the shortest time. The M1 Garand gave American infantry a 2-to-1 advantage in sustained rate of fire over German infantry armed with the Karabiner 98K. This advantage multiplied across entire companies and battalions until it became overwhelming. The Springfield Armory in Massachusetts and Winchester, Repeating Arms Company, produced over 4 million M1 Garands between 1937 and 1945. This represented one of the most remarkable achievements in American wartime production, not because the numbers were staggering compared to other weapon systems, but because America equipped every single infantryman with a semi-automatic rifle, while every other major combatant relied primarily on bolt-action weapons designed before World War I. The Soviet Union produced some semi-automatic rifles, but never in sufficient quantities to issue them beyond specialized units. Germany developed several semi-automatic designs, but consistently prioritized submachine gun production over rifle modernization. Britain retained the Lee-Enfield bolt-action rifle throughout the war. Only America committed to universal semi-automatic rifle deployment as standard doctrine. The decision to adopt the M1 Garand in 1936 seemed almost recklessly extravagant at the time. The United States Army, constrained by Depression-era budgets and isolationist political sentiment, nevertheless invested in replacing every bolt-action Springfield rifle with the more expensive, more complex semi-automatic as Garand. Critics argued that semi-automatic rifles wasted ammunition, that soldiers would fire wildly rather than aim carefully, that the added complexity would result in reliability problems under field conditions. Army Chief of Staff Douglas MacArthur overruled these objections, recognizing that the increased firepower justified the additional cost. His decision, made 7 years before American ground forces would engage German infantry in Tunisia, proved prescient beyond measure. German infantry first encountered the M1 Garand during the Tunisia campaign in late 1942 and early 1943. The initial battles around Kasserine Pass resulted in American tactical defeats, leading German commanders to dismiss American infantry as poorly trained and poorly led. But even in defeat, American units demonstrated firepower that troubled German veterans. Oberst Hans Joachim Kahler, commanding a battalion of the 10th Panzer Division, noted in a February 1943 report that American infantry could sustain rates of fire normally associated with light machine guns. He attributed this to lavish ammunition supplies rather than superior weapons, not yet understanding that every American rifleman carried a weapon fundamentally different from the Mauser rifles his own troops wielded. The true revelation came during the Sicily campaign in July and August 1943, when German forces fought sustained defensive battles against American infantry advancing through terrain that favored defenders. German veterans of the Eastern Front, accustomed to repelling Soviet infantry attacks with carefully aimed bolt-action rifle fire, found themselves suppressed by American riflemen who could maintain continuous fire while advancing. Gefreiter Otto Schneider of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division wrote in a letter intercepted by Allied intelligence that the Americans fired their rifles like machine pistols, never stopping to work bolts, advancing while shooting in a manner that seemed wasteful yet proved devastatingly effective. The firepower advantage manifested most clearly in the crucial first moments of contact. When American and German infantry units encountered each other unexpectedly, the side that delivered the most fire in the first 10 seconds typically determined the outcome of the engagement. German soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles could fire perhaps 3 or 4 aimed shots in those critical seconds. American soldiers with M1 Garands could fire 6 to 8 rounds in the same time frame. This advantage allowed American infantry to seize fire superiority immediately, suppressing German positions and enabling maneuver elements to flank or assault while the enemy remained pinned. The psychological impact proved as significant as the tactical advantage. German infantry training emphasized aimed fire, fire discipline, and conservation of ammunition. Soldiers learned to make every shot count, to identify targets clearly before firing, to maintain control over their rate of fire. These principles made perfect sense when both sides carried bolt-action rifles, requiring manual operation between shots. Against American infantry equipped with semi-automatic rifles, German fire discipline became a liability. While German soldiers carefully aimed and fired single shots, American soldiers delivered rapid bursts of semi-automatic fire that forced Germans to seek cover rather than return fire. The Germans who survived were those who abandoned their training and fired as rapidly as possible, often wildly, in desperate attempts to match American firepower. Lieutenant Friedrich Sander, a platoon leader in the 352nd Infantry Division defending Normandy, documented this transformation in his personal diary, discovered after his death in August 1944. He described how his veteran NCOs, men who had fought in Poland, France and Russia, initially criticized American fire discipline as wasteful and undisciplined. But as casualties mounted and German positions were repeatedly overrun by American infantry who seemed to fire endlessly without reloading, Sanders' veterans began firing their bolt-action rifles as rapidly as possible, sacrificing accuracy for volume. The Americans had forced us to fight their way, Sander wrote, but their way requires their weapons. We fire rapidly and miss while they fire rapidly, and hit because they need not remove their rifles from their shoulders to work bolts. The M1 Garand's 8-round on-block clip system became instantly recognizable to German soldiers. When the 8th round fired, the empty clip ejected automatically with a distinctive metallic ping. German veterans learned to listen for this sound, knowing it indicated an American rifle was empty for the 2 to 3 seconds required to insert a fresh clip. Some German training materials from late 1944 advised soldiers to listen for the ping and immediately return fire during the brief reloading window. In practice, this tactic rarely succeeded because American infantry operated in units where multiple soldiers would not be reloading simultaneously. By the time a German soldier heard one Garand's distinctive ping and raised his head to fire, 3 other Americans were already aiming at his position. The ammunition consumption patterns validated early critics' concerns while simultaneously proving them irrelevant. American infantrymen did fire more rounds per engagement than their German counterparts. A typical American rifle company consumed 2 to 3 times as much small arms ammunition as a comparable German unit. Army logisticians had anticipated this disparity and planned accordingly, establishing supply chains capable of delivering millions of rounds of .30 caliber ammunition to frontline units. The logistics effort required to keep M1 Garands fed with ammunition was substantial, but America possessed both the industrial capacity to produce the ammunition and the transportation networks to deliver it. Germany, facing increasing resource constraints and deteriorating logistics, could not have matched American ammunition expenditure even if every German soldier carried a semi-automatic rifle. The contrast between American abundance and German scarcity extended beyond ammunition. When M1 Garands malfunctioned, replacement rifles arrived within days from division supply dumps stocked with thousands of spare weapons. When components wore out or broke, armourers replaced them from abundant parts inventories. German infantry, conversely, maintained weapons through careful cleaning and conservation, because replacement rifles and spare parts grew increasingly scarce as the war progressed. A broken Mauser meant a soldier reduced to a pistol, or relegated to non-combat duties until a replacement could be scavenged from casualties. A broken Garand meant a quick trip to the company supply sergeant for a replacement weapon. The M1. Garand proved remarkably reliable despite its greater mechanical complexity compared to bolt-action rifles. The gas-operated system functioned in mud, rain, snow, and extreme temperatures. Soldiers discovered that the weapon required minimal maintenance, tolerating neglect that would have rendered more finicky semi-automatic designs inoperable. The stories of Garands firing reliably after being dropped in rivers, buried in mud, or left uncleaned for weeks became common among American infantry units. This reliability was not accidental, but the result of John Garand's obsessive 16-year development process that prioritized ruggedness over theoretical performance. German weapons designers had produced several semi-automatic rifle designs before and during the war. The Gewehr 41 entered production in 1941, but reliability problems and manufacturing complexity limited production to approximately 150,000 units. The improved Gewehr 43 introduced in 1943 addressed many of the Gewehr 41's shortcomings and proved reasonably effective. Germany manufactured approximately 400,000 Gewehr 43 rifles before war's end. These weapons typically went to designated marksmen and specialized units rather than standard infantry. The contrast with American policy was stark. Germany produced semi-automatic rifles as specialized weapons for elite troops. America issued semi-automatic rifles to every infantryman as standard equipment. The reasons for Germany's failure to match American semi-automatic rifle deployment were complex. Manufacturing capacity played a role, as the Gewehr 43 required more machining time and materials than the Karabiner 98K. Germany's deteriorating strategic situation after 1943 made long-term weapons development increasingly difficult. But the fundamental issue was doctrinal rather than industrial. German military theory emphasized the machine gun as the infantry squad's primary weapon, with riflemen serving primarily to protect the machine gun and engage targets of opportunity. This doctrine made sense when all riflemen carried similar bolt-action weapons. It became a liability when facing American infantry, where every rifleman possessed firepower approaching that of a light machine gun. The German MG 42 machine gun represented the apex of German small arms design, firing up to 1,200 rounds per minute with devastating effect. German infantry tactics built around the MG 42 proved highly effective on the defensive. But machine guns required crews to operate effectively, consumed ammunition at prodigious rates, and were vulnerable to suppressive fire that prevented the gunner from exposing himself to aim and fire. American infantry equipped with the M1 Garand could suppress German machine gun positions through sheer volume of semi-automatic rifle fire, allowing maneuver elements to close and destroy the position with grenades and close-range fire. The tactical revolution was subtle but profound. Individual American riflemen possessed sufficient firepower to suppress enemy positions that previously required coordinated squad tactics. The Normandy campaign demonstrated the cumulative effect of universal semi-automatic rifle deployment. During the brutal hedgerow fighting in June and July 1944, American infantry repeatedly overcame German defenders who held superior defensive positions. The hedgerows of Normandy, thick earthen walls topped with vegetation and divided into small enclosed fields, created ideal defensive terrain where a few determined soldiers with machine guns could stop vastly superior numbers. German defenders used these advantages effectively, but American infantry overcame them through firepower. When American units encountered German positions, the initial exchange of fire typically favored the defenders. But as the firefight continued, the cumulative advantage of semi-automatic rifles became overwhelming. American soldiers could maintain suppressive fire while others maneuvered, could fire and move simultaneously in ways German soldiers with bolt-action rifles could not. Captain Ernst Kramer of the 352nd Infantry Division, defending near Saint-Lô, wrote a detailed tactical analysis that German intelligence circulated in July 1944. Kramer had commanded a company through 2 years of combat in Russia and possessed extensive experience in defensive operations. His assessment of American infantry tactics emphasized the role of the semi-automatic rifle in enabling aggressive maneuver. The Americans advance under covering fire from their own riflemen, he noted. Our men cannot raise their heads to return fire without being immediately engaged by multiple American rifles firing in rapid succession. By the time our soldiers work their bolts and acquire new targets, the Americans have already moved. We are not fighting better soldiers. We are fighting soldiers with better tools. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided a final test of the M1 Garand under the most adverse conditions imaginable. During Germany's desperate winter offensive through the Ardennes forest, American infantry units were surrounded, outnumbered, and fighting in deep snow and bitter cold. German commanders anticipated that American forces, accustomed to material superiority, would collapse when cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Instead, American infantry fought with tenacity that surprised German veterans, holding critical road junctions and delaying German advances long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The M1 Garand performed flawlessly in sub-zero temperatures that caused numerous weapon failures among German forces using a mixture of rifles, captured weapons, and poorly maintained equipment. At Bastogne, American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division held the town against repeated German attacks for a week. German forces surrounding Bastogne possessed numerical superiority and included elite units from the Panzer Lehr and Volksgrenadier divisions. Yet every German assault broke against American defensive positions, where individual soldiers with M1 Garands could deliver firepower equivalent to small machine gun sections. The sustained rate of fire from American positions created a psychological barrier that German infantry struggled to cross. Survivors of failed attacks consistently reported that American positions seemed to be defended by far more troops than were actually present, a perception created entirely by the volume of semi-automatic rifle fire. The simplicity of the M1 Garand's operation proved crucial to its success. Unlike bolt-action rifles requiring multiple distinct motions to reload, the Garand required only that soldiers insert an 8-round clip into the action and release the operating rod handle. New recruits learned to operate the weapon effectively within hours. The semi-automatic action's recoil was manageable, allowing accurate follow-up shots. The weapon's balance and ergonomics enabled effective fire from multiple positions. These characteristics meant that average American soldiers with limited training could use the M1 Garand nearly as effectively as veterans, democratizing firepower in ways that Germany's more complex semi-automatic designs never achieved. German prisoners of war, interrogated about American small arms, consistently expressed surprise at the universal deployment of semi-automatic rifles. A November 1944 intelligence summary, compiled from prisoner interrogations, noted that many German soldiers initially believed the M1 Garand was a select fire automatic weapon rather than a semi-automatic rifle. They could not conceive that a standard-issue infantry weapon would fire as rapidly as they encountered. When informed that the weapon was semi-automatic only, requiring a separate trigger pull for each shot, many prisoners refused to believe it, insisting they had been engaged by automatic weapons fire. This confusion reflected both the effectiveness of the M1 Garand and the psychological impact of facing firepower German soldiers associated with machine guns rather than rifles. The production achievement behind the M1 Garand deserves emphasis. Between 1937 and 1945, American industry manufactured over 4 million M1 rifles, while simultaneously producing millions of other weapons, vehicles, aircraft, and ships. The Springfield Armory alone produced over 3.5 million Garands using manufacturing processes that balanced handcrafted precision with assembly line efficiency. Winchester's wartime production added over 500,000 additional rifles. Both facilities maintained quality control standards that resulted in weapons capable of being stored for decades and issued to troops in future conflicts. Many M1 Garands manufactured during World War II remained in service through the Korean War and into the early 1960s, a testament to both the weapon's durability and the quality of American wartime manufacturing. The contrast with German manufacturing priorities revealed strategic blindness. Germany produced approximately 12 million carabiner 98K bolt-action rifles during the war, along with millions of submachine guns, machine guns, and other weapons. The industrial capacity clearly existed to produce semi-automatic rifles in quantity. The Gewehr 43, while more complex than the carabiner 98K, was within German manufacturing capabilities. Had Germany prioritized semi-automatic rifle production in 1941 or 1942, when its strategic position remained relatively strong, it could have equipped substantial numbers of infantry with weapons approaching the M1 Garand's capabilities. Instead, German military leadership remained committed to doctrine emphasizing machine guns and submachine guns, viewing semi-automatic rifles as specialized weapons rather than standard equipment. This doctrinal conservatism extended beyond weapons design into tactical training. German infantry training manuals from throughout the war emphasized fire discipline, aimed fire, and ammunition conservation. These principles remained valid for soldiers armed with bolt-action rifles, but became counterproductive when facing American infantry. German soldiers trained to deliver carefully aimed shots found themselves suppressed by American soldiers trained to deliver rapid volumes of fire. The Germans who adapted survived. Those who maintained traditional fire discipline often did not live long enough to recognize their mistake. By 1945, experienced German veterans had abandoned much of their training regarding rifle fire, instead firing as rapidly as possible in crude attempts to match American firepower. But attempting to fire a bolt-action rifle rapidly meant working the bolt hastily, often resulting in feeding failures, lost accuracy, and ammunition wastage, without delivering anywhere near the firepower of a properly functioning M1 Garand. The Pacific Theater demonstrated the M1 Garand's effectiveness in jungle warfare, where engagement ranges were often measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. Japanese infantry tactics emphasized aggressive close-range attacks designed to negate American firepower advantages. Against American infantry armed with bolt-action rifles, these tactics might have proven more effective. Against soldiers with M1 Garands capable of firing 8 rounds in rapid succession at close range, Japanese infantry attacks resulted in catastrophic casualties. Marine and Army units in the Pacific reported that the M1 Garand's rapid fire proved decisive in repelling Japanese infiltration tactics and banzai charges. A single Marine with a Garand could engage multiple targets in the seconds it took a soldier with a bolt-action rifle to engage one target and work his bolt for a second shot. Okinawa, in the spring of 1945, provided the final demonstration of the M1 Garand's superiority in sustained combat. American and Japanese forces fought for 3 months across terrain that varied from open fields to dense urban areas. Japanese defenders, armed primarily with bolt-action Arisaka rifles supplemented by machine guns and grenades, fought with fanatical determination. American casualties were severe, but Japanese losses were overwhelming. In the brutal close-range fighting that characterized Okinawa, the difference between semi-automatic and bolt-action rifles became a difference between life and death, measured in fractions of seconds. American infantry could transition between targets faster, could engage threats while moving, could maintain fire while reloading because 7 other rounds remained in the magazine rather than having to work a bolt after each shot. The war, in Europe, ended in May 1945, with Germany's unconditional surrender. In the final battles for Berlin and across Germany, the few remaining effective German infantry units were equipped with an eclectic mix of weapons scavenged from multiple sources. American forces advancing into Germany encountered defenders carrying Karabiner 98K rifles, manufactured in 1935, alongside Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifles, captured Soviet weapons, and even older weapons pulled from storage. The desperate improvisation of Germany's final months contrasted starkly with American infantry units, where every rifleman carried a well-maintained M1 Garand, supported by an unbroken supply chain, stretching back to factories in Massachusetts and Connecticut that had never stopped production. The statistical analysis of infantry combat effectiveness proved difficult to quantify precisely, but post-war studies consistently identified the M1 Garand as a significant factor in American tactical success. The United States Army's Operational Research Office conducted extensive analysis comparing American and German infantry performance across multiple campaigns. While numerous factors affected combat outcomes, the studies concluded that American infantry achieved higher kill ratios than German infantry when other factors were controlled for unit experience, defensive positioning, and supporting weapons. The M1 Garand's contribution to this advantage appeared repeatedly in after-action reports, prisoner interrogations, and combat analyses. German military historians writing after the war acknowledged the impact of American semi-automatic rifles on infantry combat. General der Infantry Günther Blumentritt, who served as Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, wrote in his post-war memoirs that the universal issue of semi-automatic rifles gave American infantry a firepower advantage that German forces could not match. He noted that German commanders consistently underestimated American infantry capabilities, assuming that superior German training and experience would compensate for any equipment advantages. This assumption proved false. Equipment advantages, particularly in fundamental infantry weapons, created tactical advantages that training and experience could not overcome.